Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Obviously, this situation in the Middle East, and by the situation I mean to say the war between Israel and the folks in Gaza, has led to a lot of strong feelings on both sides. This is one of those issues where the loudest voices are the ones that have gotten the most attention. I want to say that it's not one of those issues where there is no middle ground, because I've talked with a lot of folks who have nuanced positions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in general and on this war specifically. But those are not the ones that tend to be on radio or television. And on this program, I've tried to roll out the red carpet for, honestly, every single perspective on this situation, because I recognize there are a lot of different opinions that need to be heard on this. One of the things that I don't think there's any sort of divide on, no matter where you come down on this, is your heart breaks every time there's an innocent civilian, especially a child, that's killed or maimed. I'll tell you, one of the most disturbing stories I read over the last 6 or 7 months was about a child who I think was 4 years old, whose siblings were killed, whose parents were killed, and he lost, I believe, 2 of his limbs and had a lot of other serious health issues, and he had to come to New York to get some sort of special health treatment. Now, that 4-year-old has no idea what's going on in terms of Hamas or Netanyahu or anything else. And when you see something like that, I think the first thing that comes to your mind is, how can you make it stop? Now, I realize the how is where it gets a little complicated, but someone who has firsthand experience at seeing the death and destruction, unfortunately, that has taken place in the Middle East is Dr. Thayer Ahmad. He's an emergency physician from Chicago who traveled to Gaza earlier this year and is a board member of Med Global. Dr. Ahmad, it's great to talk to you. Thank you
for having me, Frank. I appreciate it.
So how long were you in Gaza?
I was there for just about 3 weeks earlier this year.
And I realize that you're part of Med Global, and this is the sort of thing that they do. Tell people what Med Global is and what brought you there specifically.
Well, Med Global is a medical humanitarian nonprofit. Their goal is to strengthen local healthcare workers and the ability for healthcare institutions to be able to serve local populations. And so Med Global has been in Gaza since 2019. It's been all over the world. So Sudan, the Ukraine, Syria, Turkey. I mean, it literally has its footprint in any place where there is conflict or a natural disaster. And its main goal is to support the local doctors and nurses, make sure that they have the tools and the training that they need to serve their people and to be able to function. And that's part of what took us to Gaza earlier this year as well, is when this catastrophe unfolded and we started to watch the humanitarian situation deepen, the crisis deepen every single passing day. It was clear that there needed to be international NGOs and healthcare workers that needed to get on the inside, needed to roll up their sleeves, and also needed to come back and share what they saw.
So when you go to a place, when Med Global goes to a place like Gaza, like Syria, like Ukraine, they're there to render aid and to provide health care. They're not taking any sides in any sort of geopolitical conflicts or anything like that.
Oh, you can. That's exactly right, Frank. I mean, if you're going to be a humanitarian organization, you need to abide by the humanitarian principles. And what you're talking about is neutrality and impartiality. you cannot sit there and say, I'm going to help these people, but I'm not going to help this other side that's also suffering, that's also hungry, or that's also struggling. And so that's why we're everywhere. I mean, you can't, from an ethical perspective, sit there and start saying, I think people in Ukraine deserve our help, but the people in Gaza don't. And, so I think that's part of the process. And that's kind of what allows us to be objective observers.
All right. You were there for 3 weeks. What was the bulk of the work that you did? What did you see when you were there?
So, Frank, it's important to remember that the Israeli military had told Gaza's population to continue to go south. They said, Gaza is very small. It's less than the length of a marathon. And so what they were telling them is they were saying, if you go south, it's going to be more safe. And so I got stationed at the second largest hospital in all of the Gaza Strip, but the largest one in the south. It's Nasser Hospital. Unfortunately, what we saw was that the military activity reached the south in a very severe and intense way. And in fact, when I was there, I was in Khan Yunis, the southern city of Gaza, and it was in the midst of a very intense bombing campaign. I mean, every few minutes while we're sitting in the hospital, we are hearing bombs dropped from F-16s. We're hearing artillery shells from tank fire. We're hearing the exchange of gunfire from ground troops. And we were basically sitting there receiving the injured, the wounded, and pronouncing the dead in the second largest hospital in the Gaza Strip. And, it was one of the more difficult positions I had been put in because, I am an ER doctor on the south side of Chicago. And so we are no stranger to trauma. We see gunshot wounds all the time. The problem here was you're getting a large influx of people who are getting injured, who are getting killed, and you don't have the resources to support them because there's a devastating siege, and you don't have the personnel who are able to kind of continue to accommodate the injured as they come through your emergency department. So it really was a miserable situation to be in, and I had not been placed in that situation all of my time, volunteering with Med Global, going to many of these different areas and regions.
Were you surprised at what you saw there, or was this basically what you were expecting?
No, I mean, I was surprised. I was overwhelmed. I have to say, if it wasn't for my Palestinian colleagues, I think I would have been absolutely useless. I mean, by the time I had arrived, they had already been sort of dealing with these circumstances for 4 or 5 months. I had been watching very closely things develop. We have a ground team in Gaza. I mean, Med Global has projects in Gaza since 2019, and most of our staff are Palestinian in Gaza, Palestinian healthcare workers. And so they were telling us what was happening. But I'll be honest with you, once you get into that emergency department and you start seeing a lot of these kids who are coming in suffering from these severe burns, you're dealing with kids who have limb-threatening injuries, life-threatening injuries, pronouncing so many families dead on arrival. I mean, it was absolutely shocking and it was horrifying. And my Palestinian colleagues were the ones who really had to hold my hand and show me those first few days that I was there how to navigate through this and how to navigate through it without the supplies that I need, without the medicine that I need. Frank, most of the people that I took care of in Gaza at that hospital, I was treating on the floor of the hospital because we did not have any more hospital carts to put them on. I had to do things without soap or alcohol wipes or any way to keep sanitation. I mean, if you saw the floor of that department, I mean, it was all blood and dirt and rubble, and it was, really just a physician's or a nurse's absolute worst nightmare. I mean, it was really, really tragic. Wow. And so for me, there's nothing there was no training that I had ever had, training in Detroit, practicing in Chicago, that prepared me for that.
I can't imagine. At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. My guest is Dr. Thayer Ahmad. He's with Med Global. He's also an emergency room physician in Chicago. Big shout out to our listeners in WGN. Dr. Ahmad, I know you've been identified in the American media when you've been on shows like Face the Nation and other shows as Palestinian American. And I realize this may sound like a silly question, but you just referred to your Palestinian colleagues. Whenever I use the term Palestinian on the radio, or guests do, I'll inevitably have some listener write to me that say there's no such thing as a Palestinian because there's no country of Palestine. I think it's a pretty silly thing to say, honestly. I'm wondering if you can speak to that and explain to folks what exactly a Palestinian is.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up because that's an incredibly dangerous notion. It's the sort of rhetoric that leads to the dehumanization that we've seen towards Palestinians over the last several decades. And Frank, you're probably familiar with this, but in my hometown of Chicago in October, there was a 6-year-old Palestinian boy that was stabbed to death by his neighbor. And it's precisely because of that sort of erasure that I think it allows people to dehumanize Palestinians. To me, when you hear the number of 40,000 dead, 90,000 injured, you're not grasping that number. But the other layer that kind of prevents people from really grasping the tragedy of what's taking place is you being able to say, to dismiss and yeah, that's tragic. But, the Palestinians are this or that, or there's no such thing as Palestinians, or this conflict, they're the ones who are totally wrong about this. And for me, that's not going to get us to a solution. As long as you look at somebody like me, and the first thing that you want to say is you want to dismiss part of my identity, part of my culture, part of my upbringing, then we're not going to be able to get to any sort of resolution. Erasure of the word Palestinian from the conversation is something that I think is super, super insidious and dangerous. And so for, somebody who, has a Palestinian American who comes from the largest Palestinian diaspora in the country, in Chicago, we have a very rich culture that I think many Americans would love to be exposed to, would love to try our cuisine, would love to hear about some of the cultural practices, would love to attend our weddings, would love to hear about the rich history. Bethlehem is the birthplace of Jesus Christ. We have this really holy mosque that's sacred to many Muslims around the globe. There's, of course, the Jewish ties to the Holy Land. So, this is an area where there's so many similarities, there's so much interest, there can be so much opportunity for us to sort of bridge these gaps and come together. But it's not going to happen with somebody saying, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. Well, then, do I not exist? Do you not see me? Do you not see any of the children that have perished in this conflict? What about the stories on this land, all of the incredible people that come from it, the poets and the scientists and the teachers? And so, I truly, it absolutely offends me when somebody tries to derail the conversation that way with exactly what you mentioned. You hear like somebody trying to suggest there's no such thing as a Palestinian. For me, that's just somebody who's not interested in a solution. And it's also somebody who has not grasped or acknowledged the horrible suffering that's taken place over the last 11 months. And I do believe that it's tied together. I just came from a congressional hearing. I'm in D.C. right now. I just came from a congressional hearing that was geared towards hate speech and focusing on hate crimes. Talking about the incredible rise of anti-Semitism, of Islamophobia, and of anti-Palestinian rhetoric. And they mentioned that 6-year-old that I told you about, Wadi al-Fayoumi, and his mom was there. And they mentioned the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pennsylvania. And so, it's important for us to start to realize that when tragic things happen and the suffering takes place, that's a human experience. Mm-hmm. And Palestinians are not excluded from that experience.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. This is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Dr. Thayer Ahmad from Med Global. You mentioned that number of 40,000 dead, which I've heard mentioned a lot of places. Whenever that's mentioned, a lot of people question the sourcing for that. There are folks that say, okay, we can't trust that number because it's too high, because Hamas, which controls the Gaza Health Ministry, has an interest in inflating these numbers to make the devastation look even worse than it is. Ralph Nader was on this show 2 weeks ago. He said, no, that number is actually a dramatic undercount because the Israelis want to undercount it because they want to make it look like there's not as many people dead, and Hamas wants to undercount it because they want to make it look like they're not totally powerless to protect their citizens. How do we know those numbers are accurate, if we do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And so I would point to what every single reputable and respectable international NGO that's on the ground in Gaza is saying. And what they're saying is that number is vastly underestimated. The health ministry has totally collapsed. They're not able to keep track of all of the deaths that are coming in place. And if you look at many of these public health experts, they're looking at the devastation that has been wreaked on the civilian infrastructure in Gaza. And all signs point to that there are thousands of people still trapped beneath the rubble, and that there are many places that we don't have access to where there are people who have died in the process. And I would point to reputable institutions as well, academic ones like Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, the Lancet. All of these institutions have suggested the same thing. We don't know what the number is, but we know it's much higher than 40,000, just based on satellite imagery, just based on everything that we know about how these bombs work and how this campaign has taken place. And, I think when the dust settles, it's going to be absolutely horrifying what we see. The number is going to be astronomically higher. And so that's something that really concerns me and bothers me.
I know you've got a lot going on, and I appreciate you being so generous with your time. But in terms of not that you're necessarily, you're a doctor. You're there to treat people. You're not making necessarily moral judgments. But a lot of folks who agree that every one of those civilian deaths in Gaza is a tragedy, they say, yeah, the people responsible for that tragedy is Hamas, because not only did Hamas, carry out this terrible terrorist attack on October 7th, but what they've done is demonstrate a tremendous disregard for human life by doing things like utilizing human shields, by doing things like hiding under civilian targets like schools or hospitals and things of that nature. What do you say to that argument, Dr. Ahmed, that all of the suffering that the Palestinians are dealing with here is attributable to Hamas and its leadership?
Well, I would say that's a conversation that has to happen after there's a cessation of hostilities, after there's a ceasefire that's implemented. You want to talk about accountability, then that needs to take place after we can make sure that kids are not dying anymore, that polio does not spread rapidly through the Gaza Strip and through the region, that people aren't starving to death. Right now, there is a humanitarian crisis. Every single person recognizes that. Now, who is responsible for that? That's a conversation that shouldn't be a priority right now as we're having these discussions. We should be talking about how do we get vaccines into the Gaza Strip to make sure our kids don't get polio there? How do we make sure that we can get food so that the malnourished can finally heal from that? And how can we make sure that these buildings aren't collapsing on top of these families? And I think, again, I'm not saying it's not an important conversation. I'm just saying it's not the one that needs to happen right now.
The one of the organizations that has been a flashpoint in terms of controversy is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Israel's ambassador to the UN issued a scathing indictment of this organization, essentially declaring that Hamas terrorists are running the organization in the Gaza Strip. You're hearing calls from not only a lot of Israelis, but a lot of Americans that Americans should not be funding this agency because of its ties to Hamas. You've spoken out about this. Explain to folks why you think the UNRWA is still an organization that's worthy of support.
Well, because it essentially functions as a quasi-government. UNRWA is the largest healthcare provider after the Ministry of Health in all of Palestine, and especially in the Gaza Strip. It employs more than 13,000 people in Gaza, 30,000 people across the areas that it serves. It deals with a lot of the education for primary schools. It deals with a lot of the campaigns for public health. It, of course, deals with humanitarian aid distribution. Nobody has the network that UNRWA has. And, people want to talk about what happened on October 7th and the UNRWA employees that may have or may not have been involved. And it sounds like there are multiple investigations taking place. And that's something that is absolutely important. And it's something that I believe is happening. And it's, in fact, there have been many conclusions that have come about who was involved, who wasn't involved. But to me, to, on a large level, suddenly say we're going to defund this lifeline to the Gaza Strip, I think is really a horrifying decision, because already we're seeing how the humanitarian catastrophe has unfolded. And if you suddenly remove a pillar of distribution of food, of water, of winter clothes, of tents, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that there is no downstream effect? And the United States government has already, for fiscal year 2025, said they're not going to fund UNRWA. We are the largest supporter and donor to their annual budget. We, I think, are somewhere between 25 and 30% of the budget. I mean, again, that's going to have devastating consequences. People need to start connecting the dots. It's not a simple thing. We're not going to support this organization anymore. There's already a 10-month-old in the Gaza Strip who has polio, who's going to be paralyzed for the rest of his life. And it's not the time right now to look at an organization that has existed for 60, 70 years, that coordinates with the Israeli military, that gets its funding from Western nations, that on the ground has the access to the most vulnerable people, the elderly, the sick, the children, that's able to really help them out in this horrifying situation, and to say, hey, there were 9 or 10 people on this day that were employed by UNRWA that did something horrifying and bad. Yes, okay, deal with that. Hold it accountable. Do some changes. Make sure that nothing like that ever happens again. But don't cut off the entire population like that. I mean, to me, that's not the way you go about this. That's not the correct decision. And I hope that there's some sort of way that UNRWA gets the funding that it needs for 2025, and that it can still function for the rest of this year and carry out the program. Because right now, Frank, I don't see an end in sight happening. I mean, I just see this conflict expanding, and that's really worrying for me as somebody who cares exclusively about the humanitarian aspect of all of this.
I'm not trying to get you in the middle of a political firestorm here, but I do have to ask you about this, because this is how you first came on my radar screen, and I suspect this is how a lot of Americans first learned about you, is you got a lot of attention because you walked out of a meeting with President Biden. Why? Why did you walk out of that meeting with President Biden?
Well, for me, I just didn't think at the time the administration was taking seriously the humanitarian crisis. I mean, this is what we are calling the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. At that time, the famine and widespread malnutrition of Palestinian people was well established, and that there was this call for the invasion of Rafah, the southernmost town, the southernmost city of Gaza, where there were more than 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering. There was going to be a ground invasion. And everything that the president at that point had said, to me, was working against a solution for all of the people involved, for all of what we were seeing in terms of the humanitarian catastrophe. And, they wanted to have a meeting, and it would be the first time that the president was going to engage with somebody who was on the ground in Gaza. It was going to be the first time that he was going to interact with a Palestinian American who had been in Gaza. And everything leading up to that meeting suggested that I needed to at least take some sort of stand. And I'll tell you the 3 things quickly. First, there was an approval of more fighter jets. And remember, I was in a hospital where I was hearing these fighter jets day in and day out, absolutely ravage the town of Khan Yunis. The other thing was that the State Department was approving more weapons and ammunition. And then finally, there was the World Central Kitchen attack where 7 workers who were distributing food in Gaza were targeted with 3 missiles from the Israeli military. And I just felt that our administration at that time was not taking the appropriate position and that there were going to be many more lives lost as a result of the lack of political will to bring about a solution. And unfortunately, I was proven correct because we're at where we're at now. That meeting was in April, and we're now approaching October, the anniversary, and there has been only more horrors. There has been only more suffering. And so I'm very frustrated. I'm very frustrated with, our politicians, with our elected officials, with our policies. And I think we're going about this the absolute wrong way. But what do I know? I'm just a humanitarian doctor who is literally just trying to make sure people don't starve to death, that they don't get their limbs blown off, and that they can live a normal life like the rest of us.
There are going to be some critics that say your decision to walk out of a meeting with the president sends a message of refusal to engage in dialogue at a time when solutions are really needed. So how do you reconcile that with the need for constructive engagement to resolve this conflict?
I would say that engagement is what everybody's been asking for. Engagement is what we want. We don't want a listening session where you say, I hear what you're saying, I sympathize or I empathize with you. What we're looking for is dialogue and engagement. We want to talk policy. We don't want to talk about, I don't want to do this trauma dump where I tell you all of the horrible things I've seen and you say, I'm sorry you have to go through that. We're working on it. And then there is nothing that kind of comes of that. And to be frank, this is something that the Palestinian American community, the Muslim American community, the Arab American community, and people who are, people of conscience have been working on since October. I can't tell you the amount of meetings that we've taken with elected officials, with the State Department, with USAID. I cannot tell you how much advocacy we have tried to get accomplished. And to be very straightforward with you, just straightforward. This is at a time when the president had not dropped out of the race yet. He was still trying to run for election. And there was a primary in Michigan where more than 100,000 people in the Democratic primary voted uncommitted. And the exit polls were telling us it was because of the Gaza policy. So suddenly an invitation to the White House during the holy month of Ramadan comes after this sort of vote. Okay, we're still willing to listen and show up. But when you see that within that same week, there are some really horrible decisions that are made, as I mentioned before. I mean, to me, this is not serious engagement. And that's all we're looking for. We're just looking for an opportunity to actually have a conversation and discussion.
Got it. Yeah. Dr. Ahmad, thank you. Hey, while I have you here, we've been talking about a lot of weighty issues, and this is not in any way in the realm of what we've been talking about. But last Friday, I was sprinting in a foot race with my neighbor, and I pulled my calf muscle, and now it's swollen. I have a difficult time putting weight on it. Some people say all I need is rest, elevation, and ice. Other people say I better go to the doctor and get an MRI or something. Since you are a doctor, what should I do with that calf injury?
Frank, I'll tell you what, if you have given it about a week or 10 days where you actually and seriously rested it, you used some ice, you elevated it when you were laying down, you used some sort of ACE bandage around it, and it's still bothering you and hurting you, absolutely you should seek some medical advice.
Okay. But so I should use the compression, because my brother-in-law Josh, who's a physical therapist, said that compression would have been good early on, but now it's past the point of compression since it's already swollen.
If it's still swollen and causing you some pain, I think the compression can actually help relieve that a little bit. It may not decrease the swelling totally, but it still may help.
Got it. Thank you, Dr. Thayer Ahmad. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I hope folks will research Med Global, and I wouldn't envy the position that Med Global is in, but thank God Med Global is there to go all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it.
Thank you. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you can give me a call at 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.